The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is a satirical novel written by Mark Twain in the antebellum era, which is about late 1700s to mid 1800s. Now, Mark Twain's actual name is Samuel Langhorne Clemens, but he changed it when he published his first book. Now, Mark Twain is a very important historical figure, and which probably most of you know. And he is an anti-imperialist and a civil rights supporter, which means that he supports not equal, but he supports some rights for black people. And this was a big deal at this time, especially because it was just around the time of Civil War when the tension was all about slavery and how to treat these black people who were freed and yet still treated like property and not humans. Huck Finn is one of those few novels that challenge this idea of blacks being inferior to whites. And at first, in the beginning, it starts off as a normal societal norm that says that whites are way superior over blacks, and blacks just tag along property. And the main character of this book, Huck, he is a white boy, but he is not necessarily a rich white boy. He doesn't have any family except for his dad, whose name is Pop Finn. Well, that's not his name, but they don't tell us his name, so we're just guessing his name is Pop Finn. So he has one dad, and he doesn't have any siblings, and he doesn't have a mom. Now the problem is that Huck is a very adventurous boy, and his father is very intolerant of basically anything he does. He's intolerant of religion, of education, of basically everything that society wants them to do. Now, the relationship between Pop and Huck becomes a really big deal, especially towards the end of this book, because the lessons that Huck learned with Pop, or some of the things that Pop has taught him that he thought was wrong, sometimes becomes useful to him. So Huck, in the beginning of the book, lives with Widow Douglas, and she is a white woman who teaches Huck how to live properly in society. Now, whatever you think properly is, that's, well, up to your interpretation. But in this novel, in this setting, it's proper for whites to sit well at a dinner table and not talk and nicely cut your steak and say really properly mannered things. Now, Huck is, I would probably say, 180 degrees opposite of that. So that becomes a big problem, and what Huck does is he eventually escapes with Pop. Well, he doesn't escape, Pop technically takes him away. And then he escapes from Pop. Now, this book review is going to be a little bit different than what I've been doing the other ones, because this is almost all plot. This entire book is almost all plot, and the only fun you'll get out of it is the plot. So if I tell you what happens in the book, then you won't have any fun reading the book. And there's no point of me telling you the plot, because that's really not the important part. Now, Huck Finn has a lot of embedded symbols and themes, and what my teacher liked to call it was parable of the mind. So this parable of the mind thing is actually quite confusing, and I really didn't get it for the first time. After I probably asked him about 10 times, I finally got it. So what parable of the mind is that it's whatever Huck experiences in this book throughout his adventures with Jim, and Jim is the runaway slave which he helped escape. Well, you need to know this. So with Huck and Jim, they learn a lot of things, and through that, Mark Twain subtly kind of demonstrates an idea about the Southern society at that time, and that is sort of like parable of the mind. It's whatever Huck's actions tell about the Southern society, or what Huck's actions or what Huck's thoughts tell you about morality or the societal norms. I'm going to talk about 3 important symbols which, in my opinion, are the most important and symbolize the most in this context and in this book. The first one is the river. So there's one single river which basically takes place throughout this whole novel. And this is the major setting where Huck and Jim have their adventures. So before I get into what the river actually means, I'm going to talk a little bit about Huck and Jim. So Huck is a 16-year-old white boy, and he is poor, like I mentioned before. So what he does is, when he's living with Pop, he realizes that this is not how anyone should live. So what he does is that he kills a pig, and then he spreads that blood all throughout the cabin, and then he pretends like he killed himself. And then he has a raft ready, and this raft becomes very important. So he has a raft ready in the river. Now, if you know basic science, then you should know that a river only flows one way. Well, one way naturally. So in this case, it flows down. If you try to go upstream, you would have to paddle very hard, and actually you probably wouldn't be able to paddle. The only way to get upstream in this time was with a steamboat. And steamboats were very, very expensive, and they were only for privileged white people. So Huck needed to travel with a raft because he didn't have money for the steamboat. So Huck just decides to escape, just randomly. And then on his way, he goes to this island. And at this island, he meets Jim. Jim is a runaway slave from Mrs. Watson's family. And he's not supposed to run away because he's a slave. But the important thing here is that Huck is white, and white people are expected to return slaves to their proper owners. But Huck doesn't do that. At first, Huck thinks, well, if I turn him in, then I'm going to get caught too. So that's why he doesn't turn him in. But then towards the end of the book, he realizes that Jim is a person too. Jim is not property, he's a person, he has feelings. And when you first read this, you're like, obviously they have feelings, like they're people, they're just of different color. But at this time, that made absolutely no sense, because they actually thought that blacks were property. In actual history, there was a case passed that basically declared that you can carry around blacks across any borders, rather that it's free or slave states. You can just carry them around like luggage. And that was what made sense to these people at this time. But Huck decides to go against that norm, which is why Huck is such an important character in this novel. Almost similar to Mark Twain, how he writes non-societal things about the South at that time in this book. So Huck and Jim travel on this raft. So what their plan is that Huck wants to get Jim to Cairo. Now Cairo is the last city which they will accept slaves as freed men. Now what happens is that because the river only goes one way, and then they get caught in this fog, of course. So they go down the river and then they get separated. So Huck and Jim get separated, and then in that mist of getting separated, they pass Cairo. Now, what is this problem? Well, they're going from north to south. South is all slave territory, and north is the only one that is not slave territory because they didn't need slaves. They had immigrants who came and worked for money. So they would go, and they got lost. So they were like, oh God, this is like really bad. And then Huck and Jim both are like, what should we do? But why is this important? Because Jim really needs to get freed, and Huck really needs to get away from Pop and the widow, and basically anyone who knows him. So what does this river symbolize? It symbolizes freedom. And you would have probably guessed that because water is just like this, and it basically allows you to be free. But in this novel, it's specifically about freedom because it's in this context. Now the second one I want to talk about is empty names. This comes up in the middle of the novel where the Duke and the King come out. I'm going to give you basic plot context to make sure that you know what empty names are. So the Duke and the King, they are not a Duke and a King. They are two fraudmen who go around and basically take money from everyone else, and they put on multiple shows. And then what they do is that they say, come to this show, tickets are this much. And then they receive that money, they go to the thing, and they either don't show up or they give like a 10-second performance and then leave. So, but you would think, how would they not get caught? Well, white people were pretty dumb at that time, not to like criticize them, but yeah. And they were very smart with their strategies. So they are professional con men, which is weird job. But so Huck meets the Duke and the King while they are being chased from a mob. And while they're on the river, if you can imagine Huck and Jim on this raft, and then the Duke and King are right here. And they say, come on, let me in, let me in, let me in. So they take them. Now, here's the thing. The Duke and the King are frogs, right? But Huck and Jim don't know that. And the Duke and the King are both white. So as soon as they see Jim, what would they think? Obviously, he's a runaway slave. But the thing is that they can't say anything about it. Because if they do, then Huck can just tell them to get off the raft. And they will be caught, put in jail, all of their money will be taken away. So basically, they're protecting each other. And you know that thing where your friend is keeping a lie and you're keeping a lie, but if you want your friend to like kind of tell the truth, then you have to tell the truth, and then you both get in trouble, and you don't want to do that, so you both lie. Well, experience-wise, I know how that feels. And honestly, you feel very guilty. Now, Huck feels this guiltiness towards the very end of the book. What I mean by the end of the book is not chapter 40, it's actually chapter 31. And the reason being is that my teacher only made us until read chapter 31. And that's kind of weird because all the other teachers made them read all the way till 40. Now the reason being is that, well, I read until chapter 40, so I know what happens. Chapter 32 to chapter 40 is not really, I would say, a good part of the book. Because it's basically just plot. And in this plot, a lot of weird things happen, and it's just kind of random. So what happens is that Jim is taken by some white farmer, and then Huck and Tom reunite somehow, and then they make a plan to rescue Jim. But the really stupid thing about this is that, so they purposely tie up Jim to make it harder for them to rescue him, and then Tom suggests that they dig a tunnel underground to there when you could literally just go through the door and just get him. So I don't think that's worth going over because, and I'm pretty sure Mr. Garcia thought that too, because it's really just all nonsense plot. And, well, I guess that is part of the Adventures of Huck Finn, but it's not really an important part of the symbolism or the parable of the mind that is embedded into this book. Going back to the second theme of this book, or second symbolism of this book, empty names, is that in the middle, when the Duke and King come out, after all that happens with Huck, so what happens is that there is this time when they go into town, and then the Duke and King claim that they are the lost brothers of a dead white man, a dead rich white man. So what they do is that they fake it, and somehow they look almost identical to their brothers. But so because of that, they are able to get away. They're able to kind of slide away and then receive that man's fortune. Now here's the thing. In this town, there is a doctor, well, obviously. So this doctor says, are you guys all like blind or something? Like, you guys are following this idea of empty names, and you guys just believing what they say just because they look like them? Like, are you guys out of your mind? And what that means is that the doctor was actually right. They were con men, and he was the only one who believed that. And he found that out through empty names. So what are empty names? It's like saying, I'm from Harvard. I have a Ferrari. I have $2 million in cash. Who cares? Who actually cares about that? It's like this. You can't just believe everything that someone says, because some might be empty, some might be full. They're just spitting out random names. I could be like, I'm the most famous K-pop star in Korea. And I can say that to someone in Africa who doesn't know K-pop, who doesn't even know Korea exists. I can tell them that and they will believe me because I look Korean. Well, I'm a little black, but I'm a little tan, but still, I look Asian. So they will believe that, but that is an empty name. And the doctor realizes that. And eventually the Duke and King get caught because of a letter that the doctor finds, and it's about, then they ask them questions and all that. But anyways, this empty name thing is really important because it's not just about the Southern society, it's also in our society, where I can just go around anywhere and claim that I have such a high prestigious name. Because, and this relates back to Huck too, because that they claim that they're the Duke and the King, Huck led them on the raft. If they said, we're two beggars on the street asking for money, asking for nearby gold, like searching trash cans for food, would Huck let them go on the raft? No, it's because they're the Duke and the King, and because they have these empty names, these so-called titles and labels and privileges that no one actually should care about. No, like, you could go to Harvard and have worse education than someone who went to IVC. Maybe you just went there because your dad's a doctor. Who knows? So you can't believe this kind of empty names thing, and that's what Mark Twain is trying to emphasize in the second theme. The third theme of this novel is friendship, or the power/importance of friendship. And the reason being is because Huck and Jim's friendship basically broke the social norm of Southern society back then. The fact that a white boy like Huck and a black boy like Jim could be friends, and the fact that a white person would hide a runaway slave from other whites, that in fact is such a big deal, because slavery was such an important issue back then, to the point where if you were a white person and you even slightly liked black people, you would be considered like some kind of weird person, or like a monster, or like one of those crazy out-of-mind abolitionists, which really doesn't make sense now. But if you think about it, back then, blacks were considered very inferior to whites. It is true that love and friendship always happens to be one of the most important themes in a novel, whether it's historical, science fiction, or romantic, comedy, whatever, you name it. And I think that's because it's something that all of us can relate to, regardless of age, gender, or race. And it just helps us understand the plot and the meaning of the meaning behind the book more. So I'm going to wrap it up here, and I really suggest that you read Huck Finn, because not only is it actually probably one of the most exciting books I've read, it also teaches us a great lesson, and it also provides us background history on America. You get like 3 birds with 1 stone. That's great. And this plot really is exciting, and I do suggest you read all the way to chapter 40, although it's kind of odd plot. It's still fun. So I highly suggest that you read Huck Finn and other books by Mark Twain, and I will be back next time with The Great Gatsby.